The monthly Whitmore family brunch at the prestigious Harbor Club was my mother's masterpiece of social theater. Every second Sunday she gathered 3 generations around the club's finest table to discuss charitable endeavors, society events, and the careful maintenance of our family's reputation among Boston's elite circles. This particular Sunday, however, the conversation had taken its usual turn toward my perceived inadequacies. "Catherine, darling, I simply don't understand why you insist on bringing your sister to these gatherings," Aunt Vivian said, cutting her eggs Benedict with surgical precision. "The Pemberton Charity Gala is next weekend, and we can't have her saying something inappropriate to the ambassador's wife again." I looked up from my phone, where I'd been reviewing the final security briefings for an event that would define international relations for the next decade. "What did I say that was inappropriate, Aunt Vivian?" "You discussed foreign policy with Mrs. Pemberton as if you actually understood diplomatic complexities," my mother replied, her voice carrying that particular blend of embarrassment and exasperation she'd perfected over the years. She was very confused about why David Whitmore's youngest daughter would have opinions about Middle Eastern trade relationships. The truth was that I'd spent the previous evening briefing the Secretary of State on those exact trade relationships, but my family had long ago decided that my career in government consulting was merely an elaborate way of avoiding real responsibility. "This is for society people, darling," my mother whispered, leaning closer. "People who understand proper conversation topics and social boundaries. Not whatever it is you do in Washington." What I did in Washington was serve as Senior Director of International Economic Policy for the National Security Council, but my family had never bothered to understand the specifics. To them, any job that didn't come with a corner office in Boston's financial district or a partnership at a prestigious law firm was essentially elaborate unemployment. "Speaking of Washington," my sister Eleanor said, adjusting her pearl necklace, "Charles and I are attending Senator Morrison's fundraiser next month. Real political engagement, not this administrative work Catherine does." Administrative work. That's what they'd settled on calling my position after I'd tried unsuccessfully to explain that coordinating economic policy between the State Department, Treasury, and National Security Council required slightly more sophistication than filing paperwork. "Eleanor's absolutely right," my cousin Bradley added, gesturing with his Bloody Mary. "Political fundraisers are where real influence happens. Not in some basement office writing policy papers that nobody reads." The irony was exquisite. Senator Morrison's fundraiser would be dominated by conversations about the upcoming G7 summit, an event I'd been coordinating for 8 months and would be attending as part of the president's senior staff delegation. My phone vibrated with a secure message from my deputy. "POTUS wants final briefing materials by 3 p.m. First Lady's office confirmed your attendance at Tuesday's state dinner prep meeting." I silenced the phone and returned my attention to the family conversation, which had somehow evolved into a detailed analysis of why I lacked the class necessary for high society events. "The problem," Aunt Vivian continued, "is that Catherine has never learned proper social positioning. She thinks having a job in government makes her important, but she doesn't understand that real importance comes from family connections and social influence." My mother nodded sagely. "That's exactly right, Vivian. I've been trying to explain to Catherine that networking at charity galas and political fundraisers is far more valuable than whatever meetings she attends in Washington. Mom, some of those meetings involve—" "Catherine, please," Eleanor interrupted. "We all appreciate that you've found steady employment, but let's not pretend your administrative work compares to real political engagement. When Charles and I attend Senator Morrison's fundraiser, we'll be discussing issues that actually matter with people who have genuine influence." Through the Harbor Club's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Boston Harbor stretching toward the horizon where, in exactly 4 days, I would be boarding Air Force One for the President's state visit to the United Kingdom. But my family would never believe that their underachieving daughter had earned a seat on the most important diplomatic mission of the year. "You know what Catherine needs?" Bradley suggested with the confidence of someone who'd inherited his position at the family investment firm. "She needs to come to the Pemberton Gala next weekend. Maybe if she observes how proper society functions work, she'll understand what real class looks like." "I'm not sure that's wise," my mother said carefully. "Catherine tends to overshare about her work. Remember when she told the British consul that she had experience with international relations? So embarrassing." The British consul, I reflected, would indeed remember that conversation. He'd spent 20 minutes asking detailed questions about my analysis of post-Brexit trade implications, which I'd briefed to Parliament the previous month. My phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID showed, White House operator. I excused myself from the table, stepping onto the Harbour Club's terrace to take what would be the most consequential phone call of the morning. Ms. Whitmore? Please hold for the First Lady. Catherine, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday, came the unmistakable voice of the First Lady through my secure phone. I wanted to personally confirm your attendance at Tuesday's state dinner planning session. I glanced through the terrace windows at my family, who were continuing their discussion of my social inadequacies while I stood 10 feet away speaking with the most powerful woman in American politics. Of course, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be there at 2 p.m. sharp. Wonderful. I also wanted to discuss the seating arrangements for Thursday's state dinner with the British Prime Minister. Given your expertise in Anglo-American economic relations, I'd like you seated between the Chancellor of the Exchequer and Lord Morrison. They specifically requested your presence at their table. I nearly dropped my phone. Thursday's state dinner was the culmination of 6 months of diplomatic preparation, the kind of event my family would kill to attend. And here I was being personally invited by the First Lady to sit with the highest levels of British government. I'm honored, Mrs. Patterson. That would be perfect. Excellent. Oh, and Catherine? The Prime Minister mentioned you by name in his advance briefing. Apparently, your economic analysis was instrumental in their recent trade policy decisions. He's looking forward to continuing your conversations. After hanging up, I stood on the terrace for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Through the windows, I could see my mother gesturing animatedly while explaining to the table why I would never be suitable for high society events. I returned to my seat just as Eleanor was reaching the crescendo of her analysis. The fundamental problem is that Catherine doesn't understand hierarchy, she was saying. She thinks because she has some government job she can speak to important people as equals. But real society requires knowing your place. Exactly, Aunt Vivian agreed. When we attended the British Embassy reception last year, Catherine actually introduced herself to the ambassador's wife as if she belonged in that conversation. So presumptuous. I remembered that conversation vividly. Lady Morrison and I had spent 45 minutes discussing the economic implications of Scottish independence, a topic I'd been analysing for the National Security Council and one that she found fascinating given her husband's role in Parliament. What Catherine needs to understand, my mother added, is that these events have protocols. You don't simply walk up to dignitaries and start talking about policy as if you're qualified to have opinions. My phone, sitting discreetly beside my coffee cup, lit up with another incoming call. This time the display showed British Embassy, Washington. Excuse me, I said, reaching for the phone. Catherine, please, my mother said sharply. We're having family time. Surely your work calls can wait until after brunch. Actually, this might be important. Ms. Whitmore. The crisp British accent belonged to Sir James Crawford, the UK's ambassador to the United States. I do hope I'm not interrupting your weekend. Not at all, Ambassador Crawford. The table went silent. Even Bradley stopped mid-sip of his Bloody Mary. I'm calling about Thursday's state dinner arrangements. The Prime Minister has requested a private meeting with you before the formal proceedings. He wants to discuss your economic integration proposals in detail. Of course. What time would work best? Shall we say 5:30 in the Roosevelt Room? And Catherine, the Prime Minister asked me to express his appreciation for your work on the trade framework. He considers it the foundation for our country's economic relationship moving forward. I could feel 14 family members staring at me as I wrapped up the call with one of the most powerful diplomats in Washington. Thank you, Ambassador Crawford. I look forward to Thursday. The silence that followed was profound. My family sat frozen, coffee cups halfway to lips, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Catherine, my father's voice was carefully controlled. Did the British ambassador just call you by your first name? Yes, Dad. And he mentioned the Prime Minister wanting to meet with you? Personal meeting before Thursday's state dinner, I confirmed. Eleanor's face had gone pale. Thursday's state dinner? At the White House, I added helpfully. Aunt Vivian set down her fork with shaking hands. Catherine, Are you saying you're attending the state dinner? Not just attending, I clarified, checking my phone as another message came through from the First Lady's scheduler. I'm seated at the head table with the Prime Minister and his economic team. The Harbor Club's elegant dining room suddenly felt very small as my family processed the realization that their underachieving daughter had just been personally invited to the most exclusive dinner party in American politics. Head table. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. With the Prime Minister? Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID simply read, "The White House." Catherine Whitmore speaking. Ms. Whitmore, this is David Chin from the White House Communications Office. We're finalizing the guest list announcement for Thursday's state dinner, and we wanted to confirm your title for the official release. The entire table leaned forward, straining to hear the conversation. Senior Director of International Economic Policy, National Security Council, I said clearly. Perfect. And just to confirm, you'll be accompanying the President to the bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister on Wednesday afternoon. Yes, I'll be there with the full briefing materials. As I ended the call, the silence at our table was absolute. 3 generations of Whitmores sat in stunned recognition that their family gathering had just been interrupted by the most powerful office in the world. Catherine, my father said slowly, what exactly do you do in Washington? I coordinate international economic policy for the President's national security team, I replied simply. I brief the cabinet, work with foreign governments on trade agreements, and advise on diplomatic strategy. Eleanor's voice cracked when she spoke. You work directly with the President? Weekly briefings, sometimes daily during international crises, I confirmed. Aunt Vivian was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. Catherine, when you told the British consul you had experience with international relations. I was being modest. I've been coordinating Anglo-American economic policy for 2 years. The Prime Minister and I speak monthly. My mother's face had gone through several color changes. But you never told us you were important. I tried to, Mom. But every time I mentioned my work, you called it administrative, or government consulting, and changed the subject. Bradley, who'd spent the morning explaining real political engagement, cleared his throat nervously. Catherine, when you said you couldn't attend Senator Morrison's fundraiser. I'll be at a G7 summit that weekend, I explained. Representing the United States in discussions about global economic policy. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Actually, speaking of Senator Morrison's fundraiser, I just received an interesting message. I held up my phone so the table could see the text from my assistant. Senator Morrison's office called. He wants to discuss economic policy at his fundraiser next month. Should I confirm you as keynote speaker? The table erupted in whispered conversations as the implications sank in. The political event Eleanor had been bragging about attending was now requesting my participation as the featured expert. Keynote speaker? Eleanor's voice was faint. Apparently, Senator Morrison wants me to discuss international trade policy with his donors, I said. He thinks my perspective might be valuable for people interested in real political engagement. My mother slowly set down her mimosa. Catherine, are you telling us that you're one of the most important people in Washington? I'm telling you that I do the job I've been trying to describe for 3 years, I replied gently. The difference is that now you're listening. Aunt Vivian's voice was hoarse when she spoke. The Pemberton Charity Gala, when you discussed foreign policy with Mrs. Pemberton. I was making polite conversation about topics I work with daily, I confirmed. Though apparently it was inappropriate for someone who lacks class. The Harbor Club's elegant atmosphere had shifted entirely, transforming a condescending family brunch into an emergency reassessment of everything they thought they knew about Catherine Whitmore. The remainder of brunch passed in surreal silence as my family processed the revelation that their underachieving daughter was one of the most influential people in American foreign policy. Catherine, we owe you an enormous apology, my father said finally. We completely misunderstood your position. You misunderstood because you never asked for clarification, I replied gently. When I tried to explain my work, you dismissed it as unimportant without learning what it actually involved. My mother's voice was small when she spoke. Could you help us understand what you actually do? I'd be happy to, Mom. but it would require genuine interest, not just excitement about proximity to power. Eleanor looked up from her phone, where she'd been frantically Googling my name and finding articles about international economic policy. "Catherine, there are news stories here calling you one of the most influential women in Washington." "The work speaks for itself," I said simply. 3 days later, my family watched from their Harbor Club table as the White House released official photos from the state dinner. There I was, seated between the British Chancellor and the Prime Minister, engaged in animated conversation about trade policy while the President looked on approvingly. The Whitmore family learned that real class isn't about knowing the right people. It's about being the right person that others want to know. My mother framed the state dinner photo and placed it prominently in the Harbor Club's lobby, finally having something to brag about that actually mattered. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when society people finally realize who's been sitting at their table all along. The First Lady's invitation had arrived with coffee, but the real wake-up call came when my family realized that true influence doesn't require announcement. It simply is.